Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood looks black under the strobe lights, and the only sound in the universe is the frantic hammering of your own heart when the gun is pressed against your temple. Julian knew the vibration of violence before he ever saw it. In the subterranean world of the Gilded Cage, the city's most exclusive and degenerate underground casino, sound was a luxury Julian could not afford. He had been deaf since the night he was left in a dumpster behind a desolate orphanage, a newborn wrapped in nothing but newspaper and rain. Now, at 22, he was a ghost in a machine of vice. He was the mute doll, the cleaner who scrubbed vomit and sins from the plush velvet carpets, ignored by the high rollers unless they needed something to kick. The bass of the club music thrummed through the floorboards, traveling up through the soles of his worn-out sneakers. It was a constant, rhythmic trembling that Julian used to orient himself. A heavy thud meant a body hitting the floor. A sharp, staccato vibration usually meant glass shattering. Tonight, the vibrations were erratic. Nervous, Julian kept his head down, his mop of silver blonde hair falling over his eyes as he polished the brass railing of the VIP balcony. He was invisible. That was his survival mechanism. If he was invisible, Silas couldn't hurt him. Silas, the owner of the Gilded Cage, was a man whose cruelty was only matched by his vanity. He had bought Julian's debt from the orphanage, a debt that didn't exist, and kept him as an indentured servant. Silas enjoyed Julian's deafness. It meant he could say anything, reveal any secret, and the broken toy would never tell a soul. But Silas forgot one thing. Just because Julian couldn't hear the words didn't mean he couldn't see them. Julian was a master lip reader. He knew which politician was cheating on his wife. He knew which police chief was on the payroll. And tonight, as he scrubbed the railing, he saw Silas whispering to his head of security, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Vane is coming tonight." Silas's lips formed the shapes distinctly. Asterisk, he's not leaving alive. When I toast to the new alliance, take the shot. Aim for the throat. Asterisk, Julian froze, his rag hovering over the brass. Vane. Cassius Vane. The wolf of the underworld. The head of the Vane Syndicate. A man whose name was signed in blood across 3 continents. Even in the silence of Julian's world, the name carried a weight, a tremor of fear that rippled through the staff whenever it was mentioned. He was an alpha in every sense of the word, predatory, absolute, and lethal. Julian felt a rough hand grab his hair, yanking his head back. He didn't gasp. He had learned long ago that making sound only invited more pain. He looked up into Silas's sneering face. Asterisk, what are you staring at, defect? Asterisk, Silas mouthed, the words exaggerated and mocking. Asterisk, get the good wine. The 82 Petrus. We have a guest to slaughter. Asterisk, Silas shoved him away. Julian stumbled, catching himself on the railing. He should keep his head down. He should let the wolf die. It wasn't his war. But as he hurried toward the cellar, a strange, cold dread settled in his stomach. If Cassius Vane died here, Silas would become the kingpin. And if Silas became king, Julian's life would transition from a living hell to a short, brutal tragedy. The arrival of Cassius Vane changed the air pressure in the room. Julian felt it before he saw him. The frenetic dancing on the floor below stopped. The vibrations of the bass seemed to lower in reverence. The heavy double doors of the VIP suite swung open, and he walked in. Cassius was taller than the rumors suggested. He wore a suit of charcoal Italian wool that fit his broad shoulders like armor. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, slicked back to reveal a face carved from marble and cruelty. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and sweeping the room with the precision of a radar system. He moved with a predatory grace, flanked by 4 guards who looked ready to dismantle the room brick by brick. Silas stood up, spreading his arms in a fake gesture of welcome. Asterisk, Cassius, you honor us. Asterisk, Julian stood in the shadows of the corner, holding the tray with the bottle of Petrus and crystal glasses. His hands were shaking. He gripped the tray tighter, willing his nerves to settle. Cassius didn't smile. He sat on the opposite leather sofa, crossing one leg over the other, occupying the space with an arrogance that made Silas look small and desperate. "Cut the pleasantries, Silas," Cassius said. Julian read the sharp, clipped movement of his lips. Asterisk, you have the territory maps? Or am I wasting my time? Asterisk, always business. Silas laughed nervously. He snapped his fingers in Julian's direction. Asterisk, boy, the wine. Pour for Mr. Vane. Asterisk, Julian stepped forward. The carpet dampened his footsteps. He felt the heavy gaze of Cassius Vane land on him. It was a physical sensation, like the touch of cold iron against his skin. Most people looked through Julian. Cassius looked into him. As Julian approached the low table, he kept his eyes lowered, but his peripheral vision was hyper-aware. He uncorked the bottle. The smell of oak and berries filled the tense air. "A pretty thing," Cassius remarked, his eyes tracking Julian's trembling hand. Asterisk, but he looks like he's been kicked one too many times. Asterisk, Silas sneered. Asterisk, that's nobody. Deaf as a post. Mute. Retarded, probably. Found him in the trash. Asterisk, Julian's hand slipped. A single drop of red wine splashed onto the pristine glass table. The vibration of Silas's fist hitting the table was sudden. Julian flinched, instinctively curling his shoulders inward. Asterisk, useless. Asterisk, Silas roared, though Julian only saw the contortion of his face. Silas raised his hand to backhand Julian across the face. Asterisk, don't. Asterisk, the word was simple. A single syllable. But the command behind it stopped Silas's hand in midair. Julian looked up, startled. Cassius hadn't moved. He hadn't raised a weapon or a hand. He had simply spoken, and the authority in his voice was so absolute that even Silas, a man driven by ego, froze. "I don't like it when people damage the help in front of me," Cassius said smoothly, his eyes locking onto Julian's wide, terrified teal eyes. Asterisk, it's untidy.
Pour the wine, boy.
And look at me when you do it. Asterisk, Julian swallowed hard. He poured the wine, filling the glass to the perfect level. He risked a glance at Cassius. Up close, the alpha was terrifyingly handsome, but there was a scar on his jawline, a jagged reminder that this man bled and made others bleed. Cassius lifted a finger, tapping his own lips, then pointed at Julian. "A question. Can you understand me?" Julian hesitated, then gave a microscopic nod. Cassius's eyes narrowed with interest. He took the glass. Asterisk, good. Asterisk, he's a freak. Silas spat, recovering his bravado. Asterisk, but he serves a purpose. Asterisk, Silas reached into his jacket pocket. Asterisk, to the Alliance, Cassius. To the future. Asterisk, this was it. Julian saw Silas's eyes flick to the shadows behind Cassius, the spot where the assassin was hiding behind the heavy velvet drapes. He saw Silas's lips form the word, asterisk, now. Asterisk, time seemed to stretch into an agonizing slow motion. Julian looked at the drapes. He saw the slight ripple of fabric, the glint of metal barrel catching the strobe light. He couldn't scream. He couldn't shout a warning. Logic dictated that Julian should drop to the floor and cover his head. Self-preservation was the only rule he had ever known. But as he looked at Cassius, the first man in a decade who had stopped a blow meant for him, something in Julian snapped. He didn't think. He threw the heavy silver serving tray. It wasn't aimed at the assassin. It was aimed at Cassius. The tray struck Cassius's wine glass, shattering it in his hand, sending red liquid exploding over his expensive suit. The sudden, violent motion caused Cassius to jerk back instinctively. Crack. The bullet meant for Cassius's jugular tore through the leather headrest of the sofa, exactly where his neck had been a millisecond before. The room exploded into chaos. Julian was tackled instantly. Silas, enraged and panicked that his plan had failed, slammed the butt of his pistol into the side of Julian's head. The world tilted sideways. Julian hit the floor, his vision swimming with white sparks. He couldn't hear the gunfire, but he felt it. The floorboards jumped and shuddered beneath his cheek. The vibrations were violent, continuous, a drum roll of death. He curled into a ball, waiting to die. He had ruined the assassination. Silas would skin him alive. He closed his eyes, darkness pulling him down. Then the vibrations stopped. A strange stillness settled over the room. The smell of cordite and copper was overwhelming. Julian blinked his eyes open. A pair of polished black Oxfords stood inches from his face. He looked up. Cassius Vane stood over him. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. His jacket was gone. His white shirt rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms stained crimson. He held a gun loosely in one hand, the barrel smoking. The room was a slaughterhouse. Silas was gone, or rather, pieces of him were scattered across the bar. Cassius's men had secured the perimeter. Cassius crouched down. The movement was fluid, controlled. He didn't look like a man who had just survived an assassination. He looked like a god of war surveying his conquest. He holstered his gun and reached out. Julian flinched violently, expecting a blow. Cassius paused. His expression shifted. The cold ruthlessness softened, just a fraction, into something unreadable. He reached out again, slower this time, and his large, rough hand cupped Julian's bruised cheek. His thumb brushed over the cut where Silas had struck him. Cassius moved his lips slowly, ensuring Julian could catch every word. Asterisk, you saw the shooter. Asterisk, it wasn't a question. Julian trembled, tears leaking from his eyes. He nodded. You threw the tray to make me move, Cassius continued, his intensity burning through Julian's defenses. Asterisk, you saved my life, little ghost. Asterisk, Julian didn't know what to do. He was waiting for the anger. He had ruined the suit. He had caused a scene. Cassius stood up, extending a hand. Asterisk, stand up. Asterisk, Julian stared at the hand. It was covered in the blood of his tormentors. It was the hand of a monster, but it was also the only hand that had ever been offered to him palm up. Julian placed his shaking, slender fingers into Cassius's grip. Cassius pulled him up effortlessly, pulling him close until Julian's chest bumped against the solid wall of the Alpha's torso. The scent of sandalwood, gunpowder, and iron enveloped him. Boss! One of the guards interrupted, stepping over a body. Asterisk, the cops will be here in 5 minutes. We need to move. What do we do with the boy? Leave him. Asterisk, Cassius looked down at Julian. He looked at the oversized, ragged clothes, the bruises on his neck, the terror in his eyes that was slowly being replaced by awe. Asterisk, leave him. Asterisk, Cassius repeated, a dark chuckle vibrating in his chest. A sound Julian felt against his own ribs. Asterisk, no. Asterisk, Cassius shifted his grip, sliding his arm around Julian's waist, pulling him flush against his side in a possessive claim that shocked the breath out of Julian's lungs. He belongs to me now, Cassius declared, his eyes sweeping over his men, challenging anyone to disagree. Asterisk, burn this place to the ground. I want nothing left of Silas or his legacy. Accept him. Asterisk, as they walked out of the VIP room, stepping over the wreckage of Julian's prison, Cassius looked down at him one last time. He raised his hand and began to sign. The movements were crisp, fluent, and perfect. Asterisk, asterisk, Cassius signed. Julian's breath hitched. His eyes went wide. He knows? Cassius smirked, a dangerous, beautiful expression. He signed again. Asterisk, asterisk, Julian gripped Cassius's shirt, as if it were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. As they stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the burning club behind them, Julian realized with a terrifying clarity. He hadn't just been saved. He had been acquired. The wolf had taken a mate, and Julian had a feeling that escaping the Alpha would be infinitely harder than escaping the cage. 2 months later, the penthouse was silent, save for the wind howling against the reinforced glass. Julian sat on the edge of the massive bed, wearing a silk shirt that cost more than his entire life's earnings before this. He was no longer the dirty cleaner. He was the ghost of the vain empire. He watched Cassius across the room. The Alpha was on a call, his back turned, muscles shifting under his shirt. It had been a slow, agonizing burn. Cassius didn't touch him, not in the way Silas did. He touched him with intent, with reverence. He bathed him, fed him, taught him how to shoot, how to hold a knife, how to be strong. But the power dynamic was undeniable. Cassius was the king. Julian was the consort he had plucked from the ashes. Cassius hung up the phone and turned. He caught Julian staring. He walked over, his presence dominating the room. He stopped between Julian's knees, tilting Julian's chin up with a finger. Asterisk, Cassius signed. Julian raised his hands, his fingers moving gracefully. Asterisk, Cassius's eyes darkened. He leaned down, his lips brushing against Julian's ear. He knew Julian couldn't hear the whisper, but he knew Julian could feel the heat of his breath, the rumble of his voice. He pulled back and signed, his expression fierce. Asterisk, Cassius took Julian's hand and placed it over his own heart. It was beating steady and strong. Asterisk, Cassius signed. Asterisk, Julian let out a shaky breath. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against Cassius's chest. The Alpha wrapped his arms around him, tight, protective, consuming. The world outside was loud, chaotic, and dangerous. But here, in the arms of the devil, the silence was finally peaceful. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing the useless boy become the weakness of the most dangerous man in the city, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who killed your tormentors, even if it meant becoming part of his dark world? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,